Yeah, it's working fine.
Oh, every time at all.
So, good evening everyone, and welcome to Dublin Port and to the Port Centre here. So we're just going to do a few brief words about the port, because I have to kind of advertise our wares here. So Christopher came in with the idea of the book and the launch here, which we thought was a great idea. We've got a lot of things happening in the port. You see, I know it's dark now, but if you come down the daytime, you see a lot of development going on outside. And we've got a master plan that brings us up to 2040, where we reckon that's it, we're finished. We've no more to do, we can't do no more. So, I mean, we're in about 36 million tonne of cargo comes through the port now. Back pre-2010, we were about 30 million, and then we took that slump when the Celtic Tiger started to fall. So, but now we're back up again to around 36 million tonne. And by 2040, we reckon we'll have reached 77 million tonne, and we just can't take no more. So we got to look at a new port or redeveloping a port somewhere else to take that extra load. But when Christopher came in on the launch of the book, it's ideal to us in that we started a program back in 2015 into 2016, and it was called Starboard Home, and it was about music, and we commissioned 12 songwriters to come in and write 12 pieces of music and a piece of prose about the port, the river and the city. So Christopher's book just links in ideally with that whole theme of what we're trying to promote, and it's kind of get the city and the port kind of coming back together again. Last year we had Port Perspectives, and that's going to roll on for the next couple of years, in that we had the visual arts, and we brought a whole load of paintings from Antwerp, from a painter called Eugene Van Meegen, and they were shown up in Hugh Lane. And then we started up our own drawing clubs here. In fact, on Thursday there's a launch of the paintings, and it's about our drawings, and it's about the river, it's about the city, and it's about the port. So everything links in just nicely with Christopher's piece here. So, and next year, it's Port Perspectives, but it's around drama, and we're going to work with the Abbey, Lear, and a small company called Bitter Like a Lemon, and they're going to produce plays around the port, the city, and the river. So all of this comes together just nicely to launch all of this for us. And also, it's a great read. We started way upriver, as Christopher has in this, with the Vikings. They were traders. People thought they were raiders, but they were traders. And they done a lot of trade back and forward. And the city has moved east, and still moving east. You get deeper water, you get bigger ships, wider ships, and longer ships. So you got to get to that deeper water. So we had ships up at Wood Quay. We had a ballast office at O'Connell Bridge, and you can see some old archive photographs of ships up there. And now we're down here. And Christopher's brought it all the way through. And I reckon maybe in a few years' time, come back, and then there'll be an extra piece to the book, where we move further east. So I'm just here to introduce you and welcome you. I'm going to introduce Christopher to say a few words, and welcome to the port.
Thank you very much, Charlie. Thank you all for coming along, and what a great pleasure to be here this evening. A few years ago, when I was writing the book, I phoned to find out who could tell me about the port, and the person I was brought to was Charlie, who took me on a wonderful drive around it and gave me a lot of background. And what I want to give particular attention to this evening isn't just Charlie's enthusiasm, but the outward look of the port. They are doing so much to bring the port to the knowledge of the people of Dublin. And as Charlie mentioned, quite a few of the things that they're doing. They're also doing something I'm really looking forward to. They're going to have a all around the perimeter of the port, they are going to have a cycling and walking track. But anyway, they're just bursting with ideas, and it's lovely. And it is, in a day when there's an awful lot of slagging of public officials, it is great to meet public officials, and plenty of them, who are so inspired and so enthusiastic. This little book, I was here just about a year ago. I got an invitation to a beautiful book on Dublin Bay by some friends of mine, and some of whom are here, Julian Reynolds at least, and anyway, on Dublin Bay, and it was a beautiful book, and getting invited to the launch is what told me that Collins Press in Cork were actually very interested in Dublin. So I brought, you put books in your pocket now, and I brought along a CD, and I handed it to the Collins representative, and a week later I got a letter from Con Collins saying, yes, we'd like to publish your book. And just a few months before that, I had met by the banks of the Dodder, a smaller but important river, Rosaline Dwyer, who told me about the wonderful things that she and her fellow heritage officers were doing about the Liffey Valley. And they have, among other things, set up a beautiful website about it, which is in the course of development. And I mentioned that, yes, I had a Liffey book just ready for publication, and they wrote in saying, yippee! And most important of all, that along that, we have here Bridget Loughlin and Deirdre Burns and Charles Duggan from, who are heritage officers, and they all coughed up a lot of money, as did the port company, towards the publication of the book, and thank you very, very, very much.
Here.
And that brings us sort of back again to the Collins Press. Okay, I wrote the book. I had tremendous fun writing the book. I have loved the Liffey. I'm not sure that I loved it when I got total immersion at the age of 3, but I've loved it ever since. And got to know it from various angles, and got involved in a wonderful, a book called the Book of the Liffey. And that happened in exactly 30 years ago, Dublin Millennium. Seamus Cashman of the Wolfhound Press wanted to do a Liffey book for the Dublin Millennium. He brought in Elizabeth Healy, who was editor of Ireland of the Welcomes, and I was one of the numerous authors that Elizabeth invited to contribute to that book. And that was great fun, as you can imagine, but it also introduced me to Seamus and the Wolfhound Press, and what a wonderful publisher he was until he very sadly retired. And there was another author with us who David may very well know, and that is Jerry O'Flaherty.
Oh yes, I do.
And Jerry, in the Book of the Liffey, wrote several pages interpreting and presenting Finnegan's Wake, and Jerry very kindly allowed me to reprint them in this book. It's a masterly essay. I don't know if Jerry has made it this evening. No. And I want to mention a couple. Michael Finn, who is quite suddenly become an internationally known wildlife photographer. Michael gave me the beautiful pictures of Liffey birds that are in the book. And Richard Nairn, who was one of the authors of the Dublin Bay book, had a lovely picture of the ternary, and he allowed me to do that, and my son Rory did maps for me, so big thanks for all of them. And I want to mention lots of voluntary groups have done great work to develop the Liffey, and in particular there was a wonderful lot called the Liffey Valley Protection Association, which was interested in one particular bit around Selbridge. And then, of course, there's also Antashka, which is continually at it. But I want to say, in addition to these voluntary groups, there's an unknown number of paid officials, unelected people, who work like Charlie with the utter deep conviction and enthusiasm for preserving our landscape, our wildlife, and everything else. Their praises are not often sung, which is too sad. But the valley of the Liffey is more accessible to the people of Ireland than it ever has been. Beautiful parks, beautiful approaches, and so on. And then, of course, you have the people who keep it clean. And I had a particularly interesting time in the sewage treatment plant across the way. 20 years ago, you will all remember, if you went to the seaside was covered in various illegal and unmentionable objects and an awful lot of plastic bottles and so on. They have almost disappeared. I visit near here the Shelly Banks. There is practically nothing but shells there. And that the scale of that achievement is something very, very wonderful, and I really love to compliment the people behind that. I think I have quite enough over today. David, well, of course we've got to talk about mention David, who okay, we've known each other for an awfully long time, but I'm really honoured to be introduced by the man who has done so much for humanity, for the people of Ireland in particular, to have lived from the days when gay relationships were a criminal offence, to see gay marriage brought in by a majority of the Irish electorate. That is something wonderful, and David has been one of the people, maybe the person who spearheaded it to a greater extent than anyone.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Christopher. He says he's honoured. The honour is entirely mine. I mean, I have known of Christopher for many years, almost my entire life. Not terribly well, but my mother was his mother's best friend. His mother was Edith Draper, and she was my mother's best friend in Alexandra, school 100 years ago, literally 100 years ago. So I hope you've all found somewhere nice and comfortable, something to lean against, something to sit on, or whatever it is. But I'm afraid I'm going to go on for a frightfully long time, unless you do a Benny Hill and get a crook and haul me off the stage, because this is such a fascinating book. Now, one other little memory I want, and it's been on the screen here, but it's here in the book itself. It's an illustration. It's on page 70. Dennis, Christopher's father, painted a little watercolour of a cottage in a sand quarry at Blessington Lake. And in the very early 1950s, I spent a wonderful holiday there with my mother. It was absolutely heavenly. And he talks about all the terns, the sand martins that nested in. I didn't give a damn about the sand martins. It was full of rabbits. And I thought rabbits coming from Ball's Bridge. I'd never seen a rabbit. To be surrounded by rabbits was absolute heaven. This is a lovely, meandering book. Meandering like the River Liffey that it celebrates. And Christopher is a Renaissance man. You'll get the course of the River Liffey, the U-turns, the oxbow bends. You get the geological history, you get the natural history, you get the houses on the river banks, you get the mills, you get the sand quarries, you get absolutely everything you ever wanted to know about the River Liffey in this book. And he delighted me in the introduction by saying, my approach has been in part to share the aspects of the river and its immediate surroundings that most appeal to me. That is by far the best approach to everything. I mean, I remember seeing this for the first time in a wonderful film called The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, where Miss Jean Brodie addressed her group of schoolgirls in Edinburgh, wherever it was, and said, who is the greatest artist of all time, girls? And they've all been frightfully well brought up, so all chorused in unison, Leonardo is broody. And she said, you are quite wrong, it is Giotto, for he is nay favourite. That is the best principle to do anything. Whatever your enthusiasm takes you, that is where you should go. There's a very interesting ancestry to Christopher as well, about which I didn't really know. His great-grandfather, Spencer Harty, city engineer, was one of the pioneers of cleansing the Liffey, because it was really an open sewer. And I remember the days when you could smell it. And I also remember that wonderful pond system they had for treating the sewage out of the pigeon house generating station. And right next to it, they put a TB sanatorium. You know, as if inhaling the wafts and fumes from the crap of Dublin would cure TB. You know, absolutely astonishing attitude to have. But anyway, Christopher's great-grandfather was a pioneer in this very necessary aspect of Irish life. The other thing I liked was the fact that Christopher was so generous to other authors. He points you in their direction, and he said, look at the wonderful work they've done. Go and get the book about such and such and such and such. It's a remarkable instance of generosity from one author to others. I mean, most of them are mean-minded kids. You know, they can't stand each other and are always fighting and gossiping about each other. Not Christopher, I'm glad to say. He also talks about the situation in Blessington, to come back for a while to Blessington, because he talks about the clearances and the pretty ruthless way in which they were affected, and the fact that the people who were cleared out of their farms only got the smallest possible remuneration and compensation, and that must have left some hard feelings around the place among those tenants. Engineers in September 1940, and Corlett provides photographs of the event, together with a report from the Irish press. The action was accomplished with considerable ceremony in the presence of senior officers. Whether there was any need to remove the bridge in the interest of reservoir management remains unknown. But a redundant bridge provided the soldiers with a rare practical opportunity to demonstrate their destructive skills. They applied 3 different techniques and also built a temporary tank trap on the shortly to be flooded road. How wonderful! 3 different kinds of explosion and a tank trap. I mean, what more could you want in the middle of the Second World War, known in the Republic of Ireland as the emergency? And then there's a little paragraph, and that's one of the other things I want to mention, to whoever designed the book, well done. Because you break up the sequence of each chapter into a series of little nuggets. So there's one little nugget about the steam tram, the Blessington steam tram, that ran, I think, until about 1940. And it must have been a most fascinating and peculiar sight. I also have to say, I love the way in which Christopher deals with scientific information. You know, he doesn't blind you with it all the time, but occasionally you get a little burst. It rises up to the surface like some sulphurous bubbles from a fetid lake. And here we are. The water is dosed with alum, which flocculates the humic acids. How wonderful! I haven't the slightest idea what flocculate means, but I'd love to be flocculated. I really would. It sounds so exhilarating. And I just didn't look it up, because I don't want to know. I mean, as it retains its mystery, it's even more beautiful. And then there is some verse from Jonathan Swift, which I can't resist. I think it's lovely. As we come in closer towards the Phoenix Park and the magazine fort, and just when it was being built, Swift wrote, now here's a proof of Irish sense. Here Irish wit is seen. When nothing's left that's worth defence, we build a magazine. You know? It's typical Swift. And then there's a lovely and quite lengthy description of Leaslip Castle. What a beautiful house. how unique and how lovely it is that Desmond Guinness has lived there for so many years and been such a wonderful custodian of it. Many's the party I've been there, and I think we'd all want to send our very best wishes to Desmond Guinness, who isn't terribly well at the moment. So we wish him well and a happy outcome of his travails. And then there's the gates of Lucan House. And I didn't actually realise that William Turner actually had an ironworks in Dublin. Of course he must have had, because he built the curvilinear range of the greenhouses in the Botanic Gardens. And there's a story, because I went and visited them, I think it must be about 25 years ago, and they were in an appalling state. There were photographs outside, showed them really beautiful and sparkling and new and all. You went in, you could put your hand out through them. It was appalling. And I raised it in the Senate, and I got the first $500,000 towards the restoration. And I was contacted then by the director of the National Gallery, and he said, we have a problem too. Would you like to come in? I can put my hand out through the ceiling there as well. So I raised that a month later, and I got another 500,000. And the minister said to me, but for God's sake, slow down. You're going to bankrupt the government with all these demands for money. Then there's the business of the Devil's Mill, and His Satanic Majesty the Devil visiting Mr. Luttrell, but who managed to escape anyway because it was some kind of a peculiar bargain. Now, there's reference then to, and I am coming near again, there's reference to 1982 and the Breeder Chapel Lizard. I well remember that day because I was involved in organising it. It was the centenary of Joyce, and this was one of the events we scheduled. And Alexis Fitzgerald, as Lord Mayor, on top of all his robes, put on a bowler to represent Leopold Bloom, and the late Siobhan McKenna recited part of Finnegan's Wake. So it was really beautiful. So I have really happy memories of that event that's mentioned in this book. There's also very gracious mention and beautiful photographs of the Garden of Remembrance for the First World War. Something that was really covered over when I was younger. There are so many people from Ireland volunteered for it, but it's really very beautiful. And I want to congratulate Christopher on his wonderful photographs, but of course, nothing good is, I think you're Michael Finn. Well done! I mean, that photograph of the teal. Have you seen the photograph of the teal? These vibrant, wonderful colours that's standing up on its toes and wagging its wings so that you can see all the colour. It is really lovely. And then there's a gracious mention of the Duke of Ormond. Here, say I. I remember when Gay Mitchell wanted to remove the name Ormond Quay. And I opposed him, because I said, whatever you think about history and all the rest of it, we have reason to be grateful to the Duke of Ormond, because he stopped the King's Mistress being given the Phoenix Park, and he turned it over as a public park for the citizens of Dublin, and for that reason he deserves to be honoured and remembered in the name of Ormond Quay. There's also reference to, the one thing I want to say that's negative. I'm going to look at you when I say it. Yes, I mean, there's a lovely description of King's Bridge Station, now renamed Sean Houston Station, but no photograph. And it's such a stunning building. I mean, it's like a Viennese palace that took up and just flew over and landed in there. I think it is one of the most beautiful buildings in Ireland. So when there's a second edition, do put in a photograph of King's Bridge. Then there's the James Joyce house. I leave you to read about the James Joyce house, but you also have a photograph of a lovely portico next door. But I don't think you went inside next door, because that has been reduced to 2 floors. There's the ground floor and the first floor. On the first floor, there are a series of really remarkable and very beautiful 18th century panelled rooms. It's really quite unusual. So at least, although the building has been pulled about quite a bit, there is still the panelled rooms. And then there's the dreadful loop line. What a blight on the Dublin landscape. You know, it obscures the view of Gandon's majestic custom house. But that's, I suppose, a small price to pay. And then there's something I wondered about for many years, but about 5 years ago I found out what it was, and that was that funny square base with a funnel sticking out. I had no idea what it was. A diving bell, 19th century diving bell, and it's been repainted, painted orange, and it's there as a memorial. And I think that is, absolutely, absolutely lovely. Now, I'm coming to the end. Right at the end, it ends with a lovely photograph, and there's a doggy in it. A lovely, lovely doggy that appears in several of the photographs. And there is the Pool Bag Lighthouse. And Christopher says, another era in its life ended when the last lighthouse keeper left the post in 1964. Well, I remember that lighthouse. And when I was 8 years old, I walked across the Strand from Sandymount, across the Shelley Banks, and over to the Pool Bag Lighthouse. It was the biggest adventure of my life to date. And there was the lighthouse. And I knocked on the door. And the lighthouse keeper opened it and brought me in and gave me a cup of tea and introduced me to his little pet monkey. It was a boy's dream to cross this expanse of sand and meet up with a lighthouse keeper that had a monkey that used to run round and round inside the round window. It was just heaven, as is your book, Christopher, and thank you so much for adding so splendidly to the literature about Dublin, about its river, the River Liffey, the Anna Livia, as James Joyce called it. It's an immense work of scholarship, but it's also a joy to read. So thank you very much indeed.